Today we want to focus in on talking a little bit about herbicides and increasing our overall herbicide control. Now, we spend a lot of time in agronomy talking about herbicides and different modes of action, different active ingredients, and oftentimes we spend a lot of time focusing in on what's going into the tank. Is it this chemical versus this chemical versus this chemical? But what's going into the tank is only a small part of how that herbicide actually works. There's four main steps that we have to go through to control a weed. The first step is that we have to contact the weed. And so oftentimes, as an agronomist, we spend so much time focusing on what goes into the tank that we don't think of how it's actually being applied. Okay, what's going into the tank is just as important as how it's being applied as well. So having the right nozzles, having the right gallons per acre, having the right pressure, having the right surfactants, adjuvants, all of those different things in the tank to make sure that everything that we're throwing at that plant is actually getting into that plant is absolutely critical. So in these next few modules, we're going to spend some time going through and talking about some of the different aspects of spraying and how each one of those affects our overall efficacy of our sprays. I'll give you a great example. So the first main step there we talked about is contacting the weed. Did you know that for every time you drop your droplet size in half, volumetrically you actually get 8 times as many droplets? Having said that, that makes it really important to make sure that we're matching up the type of chemistry that we're spraying with the type of nozzle that we're using so that we have synergisms between the two. Because everybody focuses on the fact that we don't want a lot of off-target movement, right? What we don't focus on, though, is necessarily the amount of coverage that some of our chemistries need. Okay, again, every time you drop your droplet size in half, you actually get 8 times as many droplets. Okay, so we play a balancing role between off-target movement and the amount of droplets that we have there. Okay, so we have to contact the weed adequately. As you increase pressure, for example, you also increase the amount of driftwell fines that you have. So all of that is very, very important. The next step that we have to go through is we have to absorb that herbicide into the plant. Anything that I can do to keep that droplet wetter longer on that surface will increase my overall herbicide efficacy. We're going to talk about ways to do that in a few future modules here, but one of the most important things you guys have to remember is that from the time that I make that application until that droplet dries on the leaf, that's all the longer that I have to get that herbicide into the plant. So anything that I can do to either keep that droplet wetter longer on the leaf or increase the amount of herbicide that gets into that plant during that time is going to be absolutely critical. The third step that we have to go into is we have to move that herbicide from the site of, or from the target to the site of action in that plant. Okay, because not all of our herbicides actually affect the leaf surface that we're spraying. A lot of herbicides actually need to move to either the growing point or actually the roots of that plant. So the movement of that is fairly important. Now, a lot of times we don't have a lot of control over that other than when we actually spray that chemical. So for example, we'll take one that most of you guys are aware of, getting rid of dandelions out in your yard. When is the best time to get rid of dandelions out in the yard? I'll just ask you guys that. Well, when you look at it, a lot of people like to go out in the spring and they like to make a herbicide application in the spring because that's when they see that weed poking up, right? But here's the thing, a lot of the chemistries that we're using to get rid of those, dicambas, 2,4-D, those type of things, they move in the sugars of the plant. Okay, so going back to that number 3 there, we have to move the herbicide from that leaf surface to the site of action. Okay, well, the site of action for those particular chemistries, we need to get them down to the growing point. Okay, well, when is the best time to control it then? Well, if you think about where those sugars are moving, if we're doing it in the spring, when those weeds are starting to put on flowers, set flowers, and starting to produce seed, where are my sugars moving? Well, they're moving up and out, not towards that growing point. So what we often end up doing is we end up twisting up that weed, but we don't actually end up killing it. We just set it back. Our best time of application for that particular weed with that particular herbicide is in the fall. Because in the fall, we make that herbicide application, my sugars are going down through the growing point and to the root, and it gets to that growing point, that site of action, and we actually kill that weed more effectively. So that's the most important thing to remember with that third action there, is we need to make sure that we're applying at the appropriate time. The final step is the herbicide must reach a high enough dosage at the site of action to actually kill the weed. And anything that I can do to improve those first 3 steps are going to increase the amount of herbicide that I get to that site of action and will improve my overall herbicide control.